He says there, go to Nineveh, the great city, and cry out. I don't want to get into all the history of Nineveh. But then he says, verse 2, but Jonah rose up to flee unto Tarshish, to get away from the presence of the Lord. And he went down to another place called Joppa. And when he got to Joppa, he found a ship that was going to Tarshish, which was even further from the direction of where God had told him to go into Nineveh.
Amen. Yes. Wow.
He turned, in other words, as a way of saying that he turned his back on God. Not only did he turn his back on God, but he also turned his back on the will of God. And God, in his mercy, could have, at that very moment, destroyed Jonah. But because of God's loving nature, he decided to allow Jonah to do what he wanted to do for that moment. Which God does the same thing for us. Amen. I thank God for it, but at the same time, I don't know if I should say thank God for it. Thank God that he didn't mess us up or mess me up in the time when I was going in the opposite direction he wanted me to go. But I thank God for his grace that he allowed me to do it.
Amen.
And if you look at your own life, I'm sure you can even say that for yourself. That you thank God for him not passing judgment on you in the moments or in the times of your life when you know you went completely against what God had wanted. But because God had a special plan for you, he had already designed your destiny. He designed and set a course for your life before the foundations of the world. And even when we had come on the scene and decided we knew better for our lives than what God did, he allowed us to smell ourselves, as we've always told coming up. And in doing that, he showed his grace. He showed his mercy. And more so showed his lovingness by not forcing his will in our lives. That's the way God is. He doesn't force his will on us, but he wants us to be willing. That's why I like the song so much. Lord, prepare me to be a sanctuary. A living, I like to say a willing sanctuary. Because you can be living but not be willing. So you must have a willingness to do the will of God. But sometimes, because when we are directed by God to do his will, it is not what we want. Sometimes it's not even what we would want for the persons for whom God, look out y'all, for whom God has sent us to. That was Jonah's problem. That was Jonah's problem in this text, because God sent him to a group of people that he couldn't stand. He didn't like the folk. Why? Because these folk in Nineveh, they were known for being idolaters. They were known, the city was known for its prostitution. It was known for its wickedness. It was known for its cruelty to other people. And I must believe that Jonah and his people must have experienced some of these people of Nineveh's wrath somewhere along his life. So he had this attitude against these folk and would rather see these folks destroyed rather than God's mercy being shown. Lord have mercy. Have you ever felt that way? I'm glad. Lord have mercy. I'm glad God is God. I'm glad he didn't put that kind of power in my hand. I'm just going to tell y'all the truth. And if you be honest, you say the same thing. God, thank you for not giving me that power. So Jonah tried to get away from doing the will of God. And God showed mercy by allowing Jonah to go ahead and take his own course. But in Jonah taking his own course, God's divine plan was still being worked out. That's one of the things I like about this text is, though Jonah did not want to do the will of God, did not want to follow the plan of God, God's plan was still being worked out through Jonah's disobedience. Because there was a lesson that Jonah had to learn in his disobedience. Just like with you and I. There are lessons that we must learn through our disobedience to God. Not only in our disobedience to God, but even in our following God, there are lessons that we must learn.
Amen. Yes.
So Jonah, God allowed him to go ahead and do his own thing. And take this ship and go in the opposite direction and turn his back in the direction, on the direction, and even on the will of God for his life. But God had something in store for Jonah. That he would come to understand, no matter what his plan was, no matter what his idea was, no matter what his plan of doing his own thing was, ultimately, he would have to come back around to doing what God wanted him to do. It's kind of like the children of Israel. Children of Israel, they had to do the same thing. They decided they wanted to do their own thing. So they had to spend that 40 years in the wilderness. So God showed them, even in their disobedience, that his plan was still going to, tell your neighbor, it's still going to happen. So as the storm is building, tell your neighbor, there's a shift. There's a shift going on. All right, okay, and here's the shift. Here's the shift. Because as the sea was being turbulent, and the men were afraid of the waters beating against the ship, all that time while their focus was on what was happening on the surface of the water, trying to save themselves and the ship, God was also preparing, as the text says, something going on underneath the water.
Yes. Amen.
Okay. Okay.
Amen.
As things are taking place on the surface of your life, underneath what you yet cannot see, God is shifting things. Okay, let me tell you how he's doing it. Let's look at Jonah. The sea was raging. The waters were beating into the ship. None of the men were aware of what was going on underneath the waters. What happened? All this time, while this was taking place, God was still at work preparing something to happen. They couldn't imagine it. They couldn't even fathom it. Because their focus was on what was taking place right in front of them. So much so that they called on their own little G God to save them. But their little G God couldn't do anything for them. And if he could not do anything that the big G God would allow him to do. Okay, I'm trying to get somewhere with this. As the sea was raging and the waves were beating on the ship and the men were afraid of losing their lives, they began to discard or throw out the cargo of the ship so that the ship would not be so heavy in the sea, but that it would stay buoyant and float. But even all that still didn't make a difference. It didn't stop the sea from being raging. Why? Because God was controlling it. It doesn't make a difference in what you do in your life, saints, that you're trying to get rid of. If you're not getting rid of the right thing, look out, see. If you're not getting rid of the right thing, no matter what you